thing that I want you to know. I want you to know the answer to this question. And if you don't hear anything else I say the rest of the day, that'll be fine. But I want you to know the honest answer to this question. What are you afraid of? Because a lot of people don't know. And you need to know what it is that you're afraid of. What are you afraid of? Now, for those of you who don't like the word fear, guys, it's okay to say I'm anxious. It's okay to say I'm worried. It's okay to say I'm stressed. Right? But guess what? Those are just fancy ways of saying I'm afraid. Someone told me that in the New Testament there's a reference to not being afraid 365 times. Right? That this is this central thing, but not just in Christianity, but in religions, basically. Don't be afraid. Fear not. Because what happens to you when you become afraid? What happens to you when you get in a fear state? What do?
Go into a protection.
Yes. So when human beings become afraid, they begin to protect themselves. They begin to defend themselves. They begin to get smaller. Right?
Fight or flight.
Yes. Or hit the road. But you know what I'm talking about when I'm saying that there are people who are afraid, but they don't know that they're afraid, or they don't know what they're afraid of. And what I'm saying is, I want you to be able to answer that question. How many of you in the room are going to die someday? Just raise your hand if you're going to die someday. All but a couple of you. How many of you have a fear of dying? You worry about that? So what I want you to think about is it really dying that I'm afraid of? What if your fear of dying is really a fear of living? Or living fully? So I want you to really spend some time with this. What are you afraid of? And then how does it manifest itself? Because here's the deal. We like to talk a lot about goals, right? And if you were to interview me for a job, how many of you would ask me about my goals? Just curious. You'd ask me about my goals, and you'd say, what are your goals, Stan? And if I said I didn't have any, would that be a good or bad answer? That would be a good answer. What's your name?
Kevin.
What if I say, Kevin, I got one goal? And you go, okay, Stan, let's hear your one goal. I say, well, Kevin, my one goal is to not be afraid. My one goal is to not live in fear. And you say, well, that's a good start, but what else? And I say, no, Kevin, here's the deal. What I figured out is if I can live fearlessly, somebody talked about, if I can go through the day not being afraid and anxious, now I'm free. Now I can really live into my full potential because I'm not afraid. Do you see that? That when fear goes away, especially the fear of trying to protect oneself in one life, then that's really when you see people doing great things. In the book, I give an example of this, which I think is the best example. In Japan, there's a group of Tendai Buddhist monks that are referred to as the marathon monks. Okay? And part of their culture is they do this 100-day marathon. So for 100 consecutive days, they cover 40 kilometers, which is roughly 25 miles. Okay? You with me? They kind of walk, run it. They take off in the middle of the night because they got to get back in time to go to work. And they do this for 100 consecutive days. Now here's where it gets interesting. You have to go and get permission from the leaders of the group to do this. But once you commit yourself to doing this, if for any reason you're unable to complete the marathons, what must one do? You take your own life. And so you have a rope that you wear around your waist, kind of as a belt that you can hang yourself with, and you wear a small knife where you can stab yourself. Because keep in mind, this is the culture that gave us kamikazes. So in this particular culture, there is no shame in dying. What is the shame in? Of failure or making a promise and not committing it, or the failure is being afraid to die or being afraid, not willing to sacrifice yourself. That's the shame. It's interesting. And so there's a story, there's a book, that I read the book, but there was a guy who early in the series of marathon, he got attacked by a wild hog and it tore his foot up, and his foot swelled up and had a lot of pus in it. And he basically got to a point where he realized he was going to pass out, so he kind of sat like this up against a chair, up against a tree, and he held the knife so that when he fell over, he would impale himself when he passed out. And he fell to the side. And so he lived and he completed it. But what I'm getting to is if the option is to continue forward or to die, take your life, you might keep going. Right? And in fact, you might do things that other people say are impossible. And what I'm suggesting to you is that people who are doing these great things or these impossible things, they're not afraid. And it changes everything. What I'm saying is what's holding you back is not your talent and it's not your skill. It is the fact that you have fear. That fear of failure, that fear of not being good enough, or that fear that someone's going to criticize me. And what I'm saying is if I could go inside of your brain and do a minor operation and extract the part of the brain that gets anxious and afraid, it would transform your life, wouldn't it? You would begin to do things. You'd say, well, you're going to start this business. What if you fail? Well, but I'm not. Are you afraid of failure? Yeah. But imagine if you were, how that would change everything. And what I'm saying is we live in a culture where fear is now at an epidemic level. Okay? We're the most successful in terms of worldly goods that any adult cohort in the history of man has ever been. Okay? But we're the most addicted. We're the most in debt. We're the most obese. We're the most anxious group of humans that there's ever been. We're the most afraid group of people that have ever lived. But yet we still do pretty well. So I want you to begin to get really good at telling yourself the truth about yourself. And where I want you to start is answering the question, what am I afraid